Now we're moving back to the other side of the screen as we enter the players round, where we discuss all things that affect the players. Now, is your table usually immaculate, nothing but dice and character sheets? Or does it look more like a tuck shop than it does a fantasy land? Do you all talk over one another? Or are you respectful and you listen to what everyone has to say? I think you kind of get the gist of where we're going. Exactly. I think we're kind of a bit more the first, aren't we? But I think you get the gist of where we're going. We're talking about table etiquette today and all the things that associate with it.
Ooh.
Yeah, because I think it's a big one. As I think we've all had times where we've DM'd and we've had to crack the whip because someone may have been misbehaving, or not generally misbehaving, maybe just not playing the way that is productive for a enjoyable game. I think one of the main ones that come up, I think is always PvP. Like, I've had PvP in my game. I kind of encouraged it for this one, but at the same time, it was fine because everyone stayed in character. No one did anything that annoyed anyone else. Even though it got a bit heated and maybe one character nearly died, no one took it personally because they all understood it was characters PvP. But this is, I think, where the problem is, where people don't realize the difference between your character doing something and a player doing something.
Yeah, that's very important, especially if you're a new D&D player. You can easily get them confused.
Yeah. And it's just, the thing I was sort of bring up is, have you had, not by saying any names or anything or giving anything, but, how would you deal with that around the table? Like, as a player, how do you rectify that with yourself? Or, how do you keep an eye to make sure that you're not doing that? Because, yeah, it's very simple for someone to turn around, and especially if you have the rogue paladin dynamic. If you have the rogue paladin dynamic, that comes up a lot, but it can get frustrating, especially if you're the lawful good paladin and you're going around, like, trying to do all the right things, and literally 2 steps behind you is the rogue, like, I'm going to put this back and I'm going to retake it. I'm putting this back and I'm going to retake. At some point, those two are going to come to blows. How, as a player, do you prevent that from bleeding from the page to the table?
I think the most important thing to remember is that everyone comes to a table of D&D, hopefully, to have fun, living through the adventures and life of someone who is not themselves.
Yeah.
And that will involve fulfilling fantasies that you don't normally get to do, hopefully, in real life. So there will be kind of fantasy tropes that will butt heads, much like you say, rogue and paladin. Thing is, as players, we should all be striving to be big and ugly enough to acknowledge that everyone's kind of got their own tastes, and what tickles the pickle of one person may not, necessarily tickle the pickle of another. But there should always, hopefully, be this kind of mutual middle ground where the paladin will allow the rogue player to do what it is they're doing, but then the rogue player's not gonna, in inverted commas, be taking the piss. Realistically, the buck stops if it's clear that one player is being irked by the actions of another player. It stops. Like, hopefully the players can resolve that themselves. Hopefully you don't have to get the DM to slap wrists like your naughty school kids.
For me, because I've had this around the table where the character conflict has bubbled over into the players, and it's good to sort of like get those players to talk to each other. Even if it's happening to you, talk to the other person, because that person may not realize that what their character is doing is bleeding over to you as a person, or what that person is doing is bleeding into their character, which is then bleeding out the other side and affecting you as a player. So don't be afraid to talk to anyone if this is happening to you.
I've got a question. When is it okay to have an antagonistic relationship with another character? Like, because normally you're a group, everyone should get along.
Yes.
But like, when would you want to have an antagonistic relationship? Is it to keep the story going? Is it for entertainment purposes? Like, how does that really work?
I know it's not in the same sort of vein, but if we look at certain TV shows, things, there will always be a dynamic that is competitive, but when it push comes to shove, they'll work together. Like, as we've talked about a couple of TV shows recently, one that's really influenced me a lot is Arcane.
Yes.
one of the main characters. And I won't say too much because I know someone here hasn't finished it, but there are some characters that don't work well together.
Yeah, Dan.
But they start understanding, what each other's motivations are, and that helps them work together. And I think when you have these two characters that butt head, like the paladin and the rogue, if we go into a computer game, if we're going to switch genres again, Steiner and Zidane is always the one I bring up. If I ever have a paladin and a rogue, I will tell them, I'll ask them, do you know Final Fantasy IX? I was like, your relationships are going to be competitive to start with, as it was for Zidane and Steiner. But by the end of it, they were friends, because even though one was a criminal, Steiner understood why and understood him as a person and knew that he wasn't doing it because he was evil, it's just who he was, and had respect for Zidane in the end, even though he kept him in line, but he didn't totally ruin the things that he did. And I think, especially if you have those diametrically opposed classes, and there are a few, I'd imagine that the Druid and the Artificer probably wouldn't get along, because one is very much industrialization, which is something the Druid is very much against. The Druid is very much nature, while the Artificer is industrial. You're going to have a conflict there, but again, you've got to make sure that if as a player, if you do look across the table and be like, oh, you and me, we ain't going to get along, reach across the table and have a conversation. It's like, look, we're not going to get along, but how can we make that work to be fun and not detrimental to the rest of the table? If you just go in for that combative relationship, which is that previous group I talked about, it's going to ruin things for someone, and they're not going to know that that's what you're planning, and they will get riled up. But if you go in from the start saying, oh, look, you're a paladin, I'm a rogue, shall we, let's figure out a common ground between us so we don't step on each other's toes. It's talking to someone isn't a sign of weakness or going to ruin your character. You may find you get a better relationship. Again, like the Steiner and Zidane.
I think it's important to have if you're gonna have that antagonistic relationship between characters, you gotta have a layer of humor like baked into it.
Exactly.
Because otherwise, what are you trying to get out of that? Or like character development, like how you're gonna fight? No, it has to be either the players must be getting entertainment out of it.
Yes.
Or the characters are doing it as a jokey way. So one or the other, it's gotta be funny in some way, I think, or entertaining it.
Like if the rogue goes to steal something, the paladin's outside, like, if I close my eyes, I can't see it, and just count to 10. 1, 2.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If you have the stupid good paladin, the stupid good paladin is going to clash with everyone. But if it's done,
awful good.
The awful good, yes. And I suppose if you're going to have those competitive classes that are diametrically opposed to someone else, talk to the player.
Yeah.
Find out how to make it funny, how to make it interesting, how to then grow, and as in our previous statement, how to break the narrative and turn it into something different.
Agree on how you're going to enjoy it.
Exactly. Maybe even discuss things like the rogue will save the paladin at some point, and that's the point where the paladin's a little bit more like, maybe you're not such a bad person. But find those story moments. If we come back to other things we talked about, these combative classes are great in story, but don't do it and annoy the other person. Let the other person know this is what you're going to do. And if they don't like it, don't do it. Because, again, as Dan said, we're around this table to have fun. Which also then leads into the next thing, like for table etiquette, be a team player. I think we talked about this a little last time, that if you see someone who's not getting engaged, pull them in. Or I think with our group particularly, a lot of us talk outside of the game and how things are going or what's happening or how we'd like to progress and stuff. So you guys are there to collectively have fun, collectively tell a story, to surprise your DM. Figure out when you're building your classes or building your characters, learn how to make them link into each other. Use it like session 0. I mean, this is also down to your DM and everything. This is the player's round, but this is also partially down to your DM. But if you are creating these characters, figure out which is going to be those competitive roles. Figure out who's more likely to become your best friend, who's going to cause the most frustration, and learn to create these stories at the start. But then once the stories are going on, be respectful and things. Like when someone's having their turn, listen and contribute, as and when it happens. You're there to work together. And the best part of table etiquette is to embrace that, to be a part of the team, not the independent. Again, we go back for Rogue. We're going to be bashing Rogue a lot today. I apologize. But it's a trope with rogue to run off on your own, which is fine. But you need to be sure that the rest of your...
You got to share the spotlight.
Exactly. Yes, you've got to be the team player. Like, yes, you can have your solo moment. Thinking of Critical Role, Scanlon, particularly with his solo mission, it was so unexpected and things. But, you know, yes, that was his big solo moment, but then he brought it back because it was a thing he was doing for the team. He wasn't doing it for his own interests.
But also got the agreement of the rest of the party.
Exactly.
And it was entertaining.
Very entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of flip it a little bit, like in terms of making sure that you don't hog the limelight, I think being a good team player is also making sure that you don't only come to life in the limelight. When it's not your turn, arguably you should be paying as much attention, if not more, than on your own turns. Like, what is it that the other people at the table are doing? What is the cool stuff they're doing? Because if you can find the stuff about their characters that you get really, really excited about, then you can build that into your character, and that in turn will kind of draw your characters together. So let's go back to let's go to the paladin and the warlock.
Oh,
there we go. So
yes,
if the paladin player sees something that the warlock does, it's a conflict resolution that the paladin wouldn't have been able to do, but a gribbly warlock is able to do, then yeah, like feed that into some role play. You know, maybe that's the beginnings of your mutual ground between the paladin of Tyr and the warlock of Asmodeus. Like, you're not going to get that if you're on your phone when it's not your turn, if you're zoned out, if it's not your turn, if you're just tapping your fingers waiting for it to be your next turn. Like, the other players around the table will see you doing that.
Yeah.
And if they know that you're not interested in them, then arguably why should they be interested in you? You know, it's a two-way street.
Yeah, the phones around the table, I think that's also a big one on table etiquette. If you are sitting around a table with other people, you know, there are people telling a story. They are people who are wanting to share their ideas, their dreams, their fantasies. If you're not paying attention to that, or even if you're just not paying attention in general, there's nothing worse than coming across to a player and being like, "What do you do on your turn?" "Oh, what? Oh, what actually happened?" You know, it's a horrible sensation for the rest of the party as well, because, you know, they've been doing something and you've just completely ignored it. I mean, granted, there'll be times where you probably have to for like personal reasons, things. I'm not saying that, but it's just, you know, if you're looking up that video of the cats for the 100th time, is that really the time to do it? You can do that at home. You're here to play a game. You're here at a table or a screen for that instance. Like, especially when I play in your campaign, I only have one window open. You know, it'd be easy to click the other tabs and open them, but no, that is bad etiquette. Like, everything else shuts off for that time that we are playing. You know, back in our old days of being around the table, everyone flipped their phones over, pushed them to the side, they stayed there. If someone reached for it, it would usually be like, everything okay? Oh yeah, fine. Not that we tried to shame them, it's just, you know, the idea is we all knew that our phones were away. We knew that we had everyone's attention. And we had a lot of fun of doing that because no one was distracted by having to quickly check, oh, let's just have a quick look at the news. Like, I have 5 seconds. Let's look at the news. 3 hours later, it's like, well, my turn again. Oh, right. Okay, cool.
I mean, Anton, what's your thoughts on it all?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is finding ways to create links between characters. So both in a role play, you know, find something with other characters that you can relate to, and you have that dynamic, and that will just increase everybody's playing experience. But also, even in combat, give them the moment to shine, help them do the thing they want to do, and then you start working as a team, and it just becomes better for everyone, and you become a lot more cohesive as a group, not just individuals working, you know, on their own side. You collectively working.
Well, that also like brings on to a point of, as a final maybe part of table etiquette, know your character.
Yeah.
Know what your character does. So if you're the bard, you know what things you're going to be doing on your turn. You're like, you know, for instance, I look at my own sort of play style. I always know I have 2 steps now that I usually take at the start of any combat, and that's to haste Hiram and Bardic Badger. Oops, sorry. Haste Hiram and Bardic Badger. They are the 2 moves, and I know that. I know that now in my character sheet. I know that's how the combat should start. And
I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know that.
Hirm is
yeah.
the paladin and Badgerzar monk.
Yeah. So, I haste the paladin, I give a bardic to the monk, and that's always been now, it's become a bit of a running joke for myself, but that's always the first thing I do in a combat. And, but that's because I know that's what works, and I know how my character works. And I think to, again, prevent those moments of someone sitting there and it comes to your turn and you haven't been paying attention, know what your character does. So, when it comes to your turn, you can instantly step in and be like, right, okay, so what I'm going to do is X, Y, Z, A, B, C. Anything else I'd like to go into? No, I think that's pretty much. I think I've done enough, but it helps keep things along, and it prevents drag. And then obviously drag will prevent someone from reaching for their phone, and make sure you know what your character does. And if you don't, ask. If you're unsure, ask.
I think there's also some merit, and I appreciate this is potentially a big ask, but there is some merit in also knowing what the other characters in your party do. Like, if you know that the bard, for example, is designed for social encounters, then perhaps don't barge in front of the bard and in a social encounter, for example. Let the players play their characters as well, but if you know when, it's good to know when to kind of ramp it up. It's also
Yeah,
good
when
to
to lay
know
low.
when
Yeah.
to lay off a little bit, which kind of goes back to sharing the spotlight
Yeah.
a little bit. Just because your character can doesn't necessarily mean that he should.
Hopefully you won't have these problems around your table. They are rare in the grand scheme of things, and when they happen, as a player, you have loads of tools at your disposal. And I think we come back to it every time with every sort of play around we do. Just talk to them.
Yes.
If you're having that problem, talk to the player. If you're having that issue, talk to your DM. And hopefully they will resolve themselves quickly, because I can't imagine anyone would really sit there and be like, oh, you have a problem with that? Tough. Because at that end of the day, is that person really going to be productive to your table?
Yeah, don't play with knobheads. Just not worth it. That's really first piece of advice. Start there and then move on to the other stuff.
Well, it's also why as a player I tend to shy away from chaotic evil. Chaotic evil are just so difficult to have a good chaotic evil character. Like lawful evil, sure. Like lawful evil, you can be an interesting character. I mean, if we go for a proper Forgotten Realms character, Sarevok is a really good example when he joins your team of a lawful evil character. He's not disruptive to your team, but he doesn't exactly agree with your team.
Gus Fring
is a really interesting lawful evil character.
Where are you getting these characters from?
That one's Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't dwell on it because it isn't a Breaking Bad podcast, but
yeah, exactly.
I thought this was Forgotten Realms.
I mean, we'll see. Breaking Bad in Waterdeep.
I think if there's nothing else that we can think of, I can think of one final piece of table etiquette. The most important piece of table etiquette.
Sir.
You have to, as a player, it is your sworn duty.
I'm worried about where this is going.
To bring snacks for your DM.
Oh God, yes. If you're playing around a table, bring the snacks.
Yeah. To be fair, if you bring snacks for your DM, then you can kind of get away with everything else.
It's true.
Can we create a cryptocurrency which is the equivalent of DM snacks, and then we can just pay you in that, DM Dan? What do you think?
Yeah, sure.
We'll just send pizza to him. We'll all chip in and send a pizza to the DM. But yeah, I fully agree on that. Snacks is the most important. Like whenever I've been around a table, if there's no snacks, fuck it, I'm walking.
Someone's character's dying.
Well, with that, now our table is well and truly covered in snacks and goodies, and we're all much nicer to each other than we were before. Let's move on. Thanks for watching. We release segments like this from the Tavern Between Dimensions every Friday here on the Explorers of Elsewhere channel. Otherwise, if you want to listen to the episode in full, you can check us out on Spotify and Amazon Music.